where do we go from here? It's an open-ended question that can have a lot of meanings. But in this sense, today we're going to be talking about where we're going in the sense of the criminal justice system. Hello. Today's topic is going to cover 5 major trends that I expect to see in the criminal justice field in the next 2 decades. Now, I chose these trends based off of previous readings, previous assignments, and personal beliefs. While it caused some internal debate, and it took quite a few days to decide on what trends I wanted to talk about, I think I picked 5 that I would like to see a positive trend of. I would like to see marijuana legalized and juveniles to be treated less severely within reason and monitor more of their mental health capacities in the criminal justice system. And I would like to see the modification of the 3 strikes law that's currently in effect. And I would like to see a trend of us combating the overcrowding problem we're currently facing and to reduce the amount of incarcerations. And lastly, I'd like to see more rehabilitation options. And these rehabilitation options that I'd like to see would be for non-offenders. I would like to see rehabilitation programs that focus on giving them skills, giving them their lives back. For a lot of offenders, they come back out into the world and they don't have anything to build off of. And it makes it very difficult to survive and very difficult to stay out of the criminal justice system. In this assignment, we were asked 5 questions. The first being, how would you determine if the current criminal justice educational system will be sufficient to address the changes? I think that our current educational system sees these trends that I've listed. And I feel like a lot of my peers would agree with me. I feel like a lot of them would want to improve their education so that when they enter the field, when they are part of the system, they would want to change things. I believe that a lot of my peers believe that marijuana should be legalized for many different reasons. Some of them believe it should be legalized for medical reasons. Some believe it should be legalized because they've seen family members go to jail and prison for years over it. And I believe that a lot of them see it as a gateway into a new industry, like a hemp industry, that could potentially save and improve some economic growth. While I understand some people don't want marijuana legalized because they see it as a gateway drug, while they see it as something that can make a bigger problem, I believe by legalizing it and monitoring it, it wouldn't develop into a problem. I believe it would be a positive trend. And I believe that it could save people. I believe that those who need it for medical reasons wouldn't abuse it. But instead of suffering in jail for things they can't control, for being so sick that some medicines couldn't help them and marijuana was their only option, I believe it would save people. And I believe that our current educational system is looking to juveniles and is looking to see how they're treated in the system. And besides cases with murder and rape and bludgeoning and abuse, I believe nonviolent juvenile offenders are sometimes being treated to the level of adults because we're seeing a more mature generation and we're holding them to a higher standard. But I don't think that we are realizing what can happen to them, what mental effects this has on them, what the system can do to them. There's a podcast called Serial. And in this podcast, you listen about a case of a kid who was accused of murdering his ex-girlfriend. And he talks about the mental changes he underwent while waiting for his trial, while he was in prison, and how he was a juvenile at the time and was turning into an adult, and his brain was being modified by what he was seeing, the violence behind the bars. And I think we need to take examples like that and really look at how we are treating juveniles. And we need to realize that they're still mentally developing, and we should consider that in the system because it is so essential to having a society that moves forward, to having citizens who benefit us as a whole and aren't just reoccurring criminals. Next, I think that as more data is being available for the three strikes law, I see people being more against it than for it. In a previous assignment, we talked about California and their three strikes law and how they were building more prisons to handle how many people were being sentenced. And there was one woman who talked about her son who was now serving life because of petty felonies, because of non-violent felonies. And it's my personal belief that no one should have to have their entire life behind the bars for a non-violent offense. I feel like there are other options that could benefit us as a society. So by modifying the three strikes law to not include non-violent offenders, we could change the system. And this leads into my next point, where we that are studying the criminal justice system see a problem of overcrowding. We see more prisons being built, and we see more people being thrown behind bars. So there's more laws and statutes that need to be evaluated to combat overcrowding. But I feel like if the trend of modifying three strikes law happens, the trend of overcrowding slowly going down will also occur. I know personally, I didn't enjoy studying three strikes because to me it didn't seem right that people who were nonviolent offenders were serving life, some being sentenced at 18 and will never see the outside world again. One classmate / coworker is very passionate about three strikes, and she is the reason why this stuck in my head so much. It's because she made me see that, yeah, nonviolent offenders shouldn't be held to the same stipulations as those who are actually hurting people physically. It doesn't seem like they should have the same sentence. They shouldn't be serving the same amount of time. And that's a flaw we have with three strikes, and it causes overcrowding. The last point is more rehabilitation programs. I believe that as we're studying what happens to offenders who are re-released into society, we're seeing a problem of them not being able to acquire a job, of not having the skills to be put into the workplace. And because of this, they don't see another option besides going back to previous habits that had made them offenders. Because they need money, they need food, they need water, they need basic human needs. And so by developing rehabilitation programs for them, by having a place where they can develop their skills, a place that can put them in interviews where employers would hire ex-offenders, again, I feel like this could help with the overcrowding problem because they wouldn't be reoffending and they wouldn't be going back into the system. And that's one or more people that wouldn't be taking up beds in a prison. The next question we were asked is, how would you evaluate what is specifically needed for different or additional training? We talk in classes about the basics, and for some in the field, they just go straight into the workforce without any education at all. And I feel like we should have more testing. I feel like we should have more mental testing and more academic testing for every job in the criminal justice field, so we know that those who are working in the system understand what they are doing, that they have the basic knowledge at the very beginning that they can build off of, instead of those just going into this field because it constantly needs people. We're in a field where we constantly have offenders and we can never have enough employees to combat it. But with that need of having so many to work, we don't seem to have enough stipulations. We have background checks, we have a basic mentality, and when it comes to federal jobs, it's more intense. But I feel like with every job in this field, it should be as intense as the federal level, because there is so much that comes with this field. There's so much responsibility, and it is altering people's lives, that we need to make sure that they are constantly up on psychological testing, that they are constantly evaluated, that they are constantly going through recertifications yearly instead of things happening every other year or every 3 years where some certifications are required. An example is I was certified as a lifeguard for 3 years before I needed to recertify. But in those 3 years, physical changes and mental changes could happen. Maybe I'm not at the level I need to be for that job. And this comes with the effect of being in the criminal justice field as well. So many changes can happen in that time period that we're not necessarily looking for. And I think by needing more testing and needing it to be more frequent, we can improve the system as a whole. The next question we were asked is, how would you prioritize the suggested changes you're making? And this one was more difficult, but I believe that by prioritizing the 3 strikes law and rehabilitation programs, we will improve the system. We will lower the numbers of how many people are being incarcerated. We would lower how many people are being affected, and not just the offenders that are being affected, but their families as well. Because some families, the offender is their only breadwinner. It's the only person bringing money into the home. So I think we need to really focus on 3 strikes and to focus on having rehabilitation programs for nonviolent offenders who are going back into society so that they have a fighting chance. Next, we were asked, what criteria would you use to determine competence for newly trained professionals? And this goes back to question number 2 of evaluations for different needs and additional training. I think more testing. I think we need to expect more. I think we should have higher standards. I think that to be competent in this field, you have to have an educational background. I believe that you need to study this field and study where we came from and how things have changed and the laws and the statutes and different court cases to truly be able to be beneficial to this field. I think without education, without having basic knowledge, no one can be considered competent. And I think that with criminal justice now, it's obtainable in today's day and age. I don't think it's unreasonable to ask for a 2-year degree or a 4-year degree or even a master's. Because without that knowledge, we tend to rely on those who come before us, those who have been in the field, and maybe they aren't passing on the best practices. And we fall into well, this is how it's done, this is how it'll be done forever. But by requiring education, we have people with open minds. We have people who would be willing to challenge things that they see as wrong. So I think to be competent, they have to pass a basic background check. They have to pass a mental stability test. They have to see a psychologist. They have to be deemed competent in all of those testing regards. But I think to be competent, you have to have education. And you have to be willing to go after the education and to learn about your field. Because without it, you're going in blind, and no one wants someone who's ignorant to the issues in the criminal justice system. And the last question we were asked is, how would you evaluate the effectiveness of the new training? And I think that by looking at the testing and seeing how people are changing and seeing their different certifications, it is a good evaluation tool. And it'll show how they're being effective on paper. But I think it's also important to evaluate the new training by evaluating how it affects the community, how it affects the crime rates. We don't need to just look at the people in the system who are working. We don't need to look at how they're interacting with everyone. We don't need to only look at their productivity. We need to also look at, is crime going down? By doing these trends, are people more safe? Do we have less offenders on the street? Do we have less people going into prisons and jails? Do we have less? And do we have more criminal justice employees out there? Do we have more people who care about the system, who are educated on the system? And we also need to look to the community. We need to look at their perception of what's happening. We need to see if they're noticing changes, if they're seeing less crime, if they are becoming more prideful of their area, if they're feeling more safe, if they trust the system more. Because by having that, I believe it'll give us a well-rounded evaluation. Yes, having those paper tests and having coworkers in HR and the tops of the system that they're in, evaluating them on their base level is a great tool. But they also need to be evaluated by the people they're serving. Because if the people they are serving don't feel safe, if there isn't less crime, if there isn't more community involved, we will never have a full evaluation, because we will never have the full scope of things. By being evaluated by people in the system, we are already biased of what we think is needed based off of our interactions and what we've seen. By including an evaluation at the community level, we open the door to fresh eyes, to someone who may not know what the laws are, by someone who may not understand the system, but they can understand what a criminal is. They can understand the feeling of trust in the system. They can understand seeing a shift in people and their interactions. They can make us more human and more understanding and not so by the book. And it would make our system more well-rounded. If the people can't see what we are doing is effective and is affecting their lives in a positive way, we are not truly being effective in what we are doing. We have to open it to more than just us who have studied it, more than just us who have been there. And the community includes people who have been victims, people who have family who are offenders, and they can give us a new insight. And I think that's the key to evaluating the effectiveness. I know that the trends I chose were a few controversial, but I believe that these 5 trends, if they go in the positive way, if we legalize marijuana for practical reasons, if we truly look at how we're treating juveniles in the system and focus on their mentality since they're still developing, if we modify the 3 strikes law, if we can combat overcrowding, and if we can rehabilitate nonviolent offenders and make them valuable people in society, I think we can really turn it around. I think that the criminal justice system can gain back the respect it used to have, and we can start to eliminate that fear. We must expect more. We must expect them to be educated. We must expect them to be mentally stable. And we must expect more training. I think that's where we go from here. I think that can improve what we're doing. It can improve our system. And it can improve relations. So with these trends, if they go in a positive way in the next 2 decades, I think that we will go to a positive place. I think we will go to a more peaceful place. And I think the criminal justice system will gain back things it has lost over the past decade. I think we will return to something where people would smile and wave to those working in the criminal justice system and respect them instead of fearing them and wishing that they weren't there. If you happen upon this podcast outside of the class I was doing this for, thank you for listening and thank you for getting this far. I would love for you to comment below and let me know your thoughts. If you agree with me, if you disagree with me, if you think there's different trends that could improve our system, if you think there's something I didn't bring up that went with a point that I brought up, I would love to hear from you. I have a passion for this field and I want to learn more. And I want to lead by example. I want to have that community give notes and evaluate what I've done here and what I've said. Because by doing that, I think I can grow and I think I can learn more. And by learning more, I can contribute more to the system. I have faith in the criminal justice system, and I am passionate about it. But there are things we need to improve on. We need to improve who we are and what we do. So again, thank you for listening, and I look forward to reading your comments below.